In early 1929, after years of hard work, Edgar Cayce saw his hospital accept its first patient. Headed by his friend from Kentucky, Dr. Thomas House, it featured the latest in osteopathic equipment and massage technique, homeopathic remedies, and a low-fat diet. Cayce's readings began to suggest treatments with low levels of electricity applied to the body, something chiropractic patients today would be familiar with.
Dad said one day they would be able to take a drop of blood and diagnose the condition of the human body. At the time he said it, it was ridiculous, but now it's a normal procedure.
Edgar proudly noted that the building and grounds, complete with gardens and a tennis court, felt more like a large home than a hospital. Cayce had survived all the skeptics that called him a fake, a charlatan, and a heretic. Here was his triumph. Life in Virginia Beach was rich, and during the warm summers, magical.
And everybody at the beach used to call him Doc because they thought he was a doctor, but he liked to garden, he liked to fish. All these sand dunes up here were covered with grapevines, and Dad used to go out, and we used to go out and pick grapes, and he'd make grape jelly and wine from them. He was a very ordinary person when he was awake. It was just those 30 or 40 minutes when he was asleep that he was unusual.
During his trips to Virginia Beach, Morton Blumenthal stayed at the newly completed Cavalier Hotel. He had budgeted $3,000 a month to run the hospital after an initial investment of over $100,000. As long as he was informed beforehand, Cayce had come to accept financial questions during his readings. On April 6, 1929, Blumenthal sought advice on the booming stock market. Cayce warned, there must surely come a break where it would be panic in the money centers. The reading proved prophetic. 6 months later, the market crashed. Against the background of the Great Depression came the unthinkable. The hospital failed less than 3 years after it opened. A biographer would later write that Edgar, devastated, wandered the empty corridors collecting keepsakes, including a photograph of his mother.
It was a real blow. It was, I mean, we had moved to the beach, the hospital had been built, it was operating, people were getting well. Then all of a sudden, it was down to where he started from.
If Edgar Cayce had a weakness, it was his inability to say no. As manager of the hospital, he approved extravagant expenditures, free treatments and meals for his staff and friends. He wanted to please everyone, make time for anyone who asked for it. But this weakness was also part of his gift.
His home, his privacy was invaded constantly. People would knock on his door at all hours of the day and night. And they had to be gracious to all of the visitors, and they were.
He could mark people with the genius of their lives if they let him. Wide awake, talk with them, get hold of them. They go away marked for good.
The popular story was that the misfortunes on Wall Street ruined the Blumenthals. The evidence suggests they emerged unscathed. Some believe the hospital closure came after a power struggle between Morton and Edwin Blumenthal and David Kahn over who had primary access to Edgar's unique abilities. When Kahn won, the Blumenthals pulled out. Later, Edgar wrote with characteristic goodwill, "I blame no one else but myself for its failure."
The readings were kind of few and far between, and after that, it was tough times.
David Kahn made a fortune in the furniture business, thanks in part to Edgar's readings. The Blumenthals and Cayce never spoke again. Edgar walked away from his hospital flat broke. Later that year, 1931, Cayce rallied. He called a meeting of his closest supporters, like-minded people who believed in his work. He began a new organization, the Nonprofit Association for Research and Enlightenment. Readings would be given free to those unable to pay, and Edgar would receive an annual salary. During a fundraising trip to New York, Edgar gave a reading to a woman who had claimed to be in desperate need. The woman and her companion turned out to be policewomen, and Edgar, Gertrude, and Gladys Davis were arrested for fortune-telling. 31 years earlier, back in Hopkinsville, Edgar had feared that his powers might lead him down the wrong path. Now they had, and he was headed to jail, much to the delight of the tabloid press.
They took a picture of Dad and took a picture of all three of them, and they cut Mother out of the picture and said, "Psychic arrested in motel with blonde secretary." Really great headline.
The New York case was thin. The policewoman had signed a release and had not been solicited. The charges were dismissed. But in 1935 in Detroit, Edgar was found guilty for practicing medicine without a license. Though he was freed on probation with no sentence or fine imposed, Cayce was mortified. Soon after returning from Detroit, Edgar had a dream of reincarnating in Nebraska in the year 2100. In the dream, he finds that his works as Edgar Cayce are still known.
It came to him at a time when he was feeling very distraught. He was wondering whether his work was really of value, whether it would continue. And so this dream really served as a source of encouragement for him.
Cayce's readings, which were expanding in detail and scope, were also encouraging. He began to describe as best he could the journey his consciousness would take when in trance.
He would describe moving up through a beam of light, passing images and sounds, and his consciousness moving to other dimensions that are related to vast sources of information.
Cayce called this source of information the Akashic Record, where every thought, sound, or event from the beginning of time is recorded. He believed he could access this resource, as well as his subject's subconscious mind, telepathically, to answer any question posed to him. The concept boggled the mind, then as now.
That this man would lie down on a couch and essentially go to sleep and come up with this information, it's just too big a jump for lots of scientists and trained medical professionals today.
Edgar's personal life readings indicated 17 different incarnations as a high priest in Egypt, a nomadic ruler in Persia, and in the fabled Atlantis, which he mentioned nearly 700 times. He described a highly advanced society that collapsed over a span of 40,000 years, with its survivors settling partly in Egypt. Cayce, nearing 60, seemed to sense his time was limited. Readings of past, present, and future were now spilling out.